One copper wire boosted yields in 1926. So why did it vanish? YouTube script for Nature and Green Focus. In 1926, a French farmer filed a patent for a device he claimed could triple crop yields using nothing but a copper wire and the electricity already in the air. No chemicals, no machinery, just one wire. The British government investigated. They documented the results. Photographs showed corn 10 feet tall and pumpkins the size of barrels. Then, almost overnight, the technology disappeared, erased from agricultural textbooks, buried in forgotten patent files, as if someone didn't want you to know about it. Today, we're digging up that story, and what we found might change how you think about growing food forever. Hey there, welcome to Nature and Green Focus. I'm so glad you're here because what we're covering today is one of those stories that sits right at the intersection of science, mystery, and practical gardening. And here's the thing, this isn't some wild conspiracy theory. We're talking about documented patents, government investigations, and modern scientific studies that prove this method actually works. If this intrigues you even a little bit, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your thoughts as we go. I read every single one. All right, let's dive into one of the strangest chapters in the history of agriculture, the inventor who challenged everything. His name was Justin Christofleau. Born in France in 1865, he wasn't a scientist with a fancy degree. He was a farmer, a tinkerer, someone who spent decades in the dirt, watching plants grow, asking questions nobody else was asking. And the question that consumed him was this: what if plants need more than just soil nutrients and water? What if they also need energy from the sky? By the early 1920s, Christofleau had built something that looked absolutely bizarre. Metal rods sticking out of the ground. Copper spirals wound around wooden stakes. Antennas pointed at the sky. His neighbors probably thought he'd lost his mind. But the harvests told a different story. Oats growing 5 feet tall when they should have been half that. Old dying trees bursting back to life. Vegetables so large they looked like they belonged in a storybook. On October 26, 1925, Christofleau did something that changed everything. He filed a patent in Switzerland. The document, patent number CH118648A, described what he called the electromagnetic telluric apparatus. It was a system of copper plates and magnetic steel designed to capture atmospheric electricity and channel it directly into the soil. This wasn't some backyard theory scribbled in a notebook. This was a legal document, official, on the record. And it's still there today if you know where to look. The patent laid out every wire, every plate, every connection. It was precise, measurable, reproducible. Christofleau published his findings in books and agricultural journals. He invited skeptics to visit his experimental gardens. He wanted people to see it with their own eyes. The French press covered his work, sometimes with doubt, yes, but often with genuine curiosity at the photographs he provided. For Christofleau, the proof was never meant to be secret. It was meant to be shared, tested, verified in fields all over the world. He believed nature had already given us everything we needed to grow food. We just had to learn how to listen. The photographs that stunned the world. The images from the mid-1920s are hard to believe even now. Pumpkins wider than barrels, cabbages nearly as tall as a grown person, corn stalks towering overhead like small trees. These weren't illustrations or exaggerations. They were photographs, published in French gardening magazines, local newspapers, and Christofleau's own pamphlets. The claims attached to those photos were even bolder. Harvests twice the normal size, sometimes triple. People couldn't stop talking about it. And that's when the British government got involved. In 1918, the British Ministry of Agriculture had established something called the Electro-Culture Committee. Their job was simple: separate fact from fantasy. For nearly 2 decades, from 1918 all the way to 1936, this committee collected evidence. field photographs, yield records, testimonials from inventors like Christofleau. They sent observers across Europe. They stamped their reports with "not for publication" and cataloged everything. Giant barley stalks, peculiar wire devices sprouting in French gardens, page after page of documentation. But here's where it gets strange. Despite all those striking images, the committee's files reveal something troubling. No original negatives were ever provided. No independent third-party validations for the most dramatic results ever surfaced. The photographs were persuasive, almost too persuasive. They sat in that uncomfortable space between hard evidence and legend. For every snapshot of an impossible harvest, there was a lingering question. Could a simple copper wire really explain this? The visual record demanded explanation, but the search for definitive proof was only just beginning. And then, just as the world was starting to pay attention, something happened. The story went quiet. The invisible energy above your garden. Before we talk about what happened to electroculture, we need to understand the science behind it. Because this isn't magic, it's physics. Right now, as you're watching this, there's an invisible river of electricity flowing above your head. The air holds a steady electrical charge. Positive in the sky, negative in the ground beneath your feet. Scientists call this the atmospheric potential gradient. On a clear day, the voltage difference between sky and earth is about 100 volts for every meter you climb. It's not lightning. You can't feel it, but it's always there, flowing like a gentle tide. And plants? They're standing right in the middle of it. Think about it. A plant's leaves and stems are covered in microscopic hairs and waxy surfaces that act as natural conductors. Every blade of grass, every tomato plant is quietly collecting electrical charge from the air. Their roots buried in the earth connect to the negative pole of this natural battery. The plant itself becomes a living antenna, bridging the gap between sky and soil. This isn't poetry, it's measurable. In some experiments, a copper rod driven into the ground will register a faint current, proof that air and earth are constantly exchanging energy, even on the calmest day. For most of human history, this background field went completely unnoticed. But in the early 20th century, experimenters like Christofleau started asking a radical question. If every plant is already an antenna, what happens when you give it a better one? A copper wire is far more conductive than a stem or leaf. Planted in the ground with its tip pointed at the sky, it can pull in atmospheric charge more efficiently and channel it directly to the root zone. The idea was elegant. Work with nature's existing electrical field, not against it. But here's where it gets even more interesting. How plants actually use electricity. Inside every plant, there's a conversation happening, and it's spoken in the language of electricity. Roots, stems, and leaves don't just move water and nutrients around, they transmit tiny electrical signals called action potentials and variation potentials that ripple through cells. These aren't random, they're messages, triggers that change how a plant grows, photosynthesizes, and responds to stress. When a tomato leaf gets damaged by a pest, for example, an electrical wave travels down the stem, alerting distant cells to prepare their defenses. This is basic plant biology, a living circuit tuned to its environment. Researchers have measured these signals using fine electrodes. Even a faint electrical field, just a few microvolts per meter, can spark a chain reaction inside the plant. Some studies show that when exposed to an external electrical gradient, plants ramp up antioxidant production. They activate genes tied to resilience and growth. They become stronger, healthier, more productive. And here's where Christofleu's copper spirals come in. The spiral shape, found everywhere in nature, from snail shells to sunflower heads, isn't just decorative. It functions like an antenna. It gathers energy from a wide area and focuses it to a single point. Early electroculture inventors believed that a copper spiral planted in the soil could capture and amplify the Earth's natural currents. The geometry tuned into frequencies already present in the field, letting biology and physics work together. Instead of force-feeding plants with synthetic chemicals, the goal was to unlock the electrical pathways that evolution built into every living cell. The copper wire wasn't a magic wand, it was a key, a way to open doors that nature had already installed. Quick pause here. If you're finding this fascinating, or even just curious, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people discover stories like this. And drop a comment. Have you ever heard of electroculture before? Would you try this in your own garden? All right, back to the story. Because we're about to get to the part that might make you angry. The industry that buried the truth. By the early 1920s, something was changing in agriculture, and it had nothing to do with copper wires or atmospheric electricity. Factories in Germany and the United States had figured out how to make synthetic ammonia on a massive scale. The Haber-Bosch process, originally developed for wartime explosives, was now filling train cars and cargo ships with bags of chemical fertilizer. Production exploded, from just over 1 million tons per year in the 1920s to nearly 20 million tons by 1960. The price of ammonia dropped from $100 per ton to less than $30 per ton. And here's the brilliance of it. From a business perspective anyway, farmers who once relied on compost or a one-time investment in a copper wire now faced a new kind of contract. Buy fertilizer every spring or risk a smaller harvest. The subscription model was built in. Each season, another purchase. Each year, another invoice. The market swelled, profits soared. The fertilizer industry became a giant, and its wealth was tied to annual sales, not lasting solutions. Now imagine you're running one of these companies. You've got factories, distribution networks, investors expecting returns every quarter. And then some French farmer shows up with a copper wire claiming he can triple yields with a one-time investment. Forever. No refills, no repeat customers. In this new economy, a method that worked permanently wasn't just an alternative, it was a threat. How the story disappeared. So what happened? The suppression wasn't dramatic. There were no raids, no book burnings, no arrests. It was quieter than that. And in some ways, more effective. Newspaper editors and academics started drawing a line. Headlines began treating electroculture as a curiosity, not a contender. Words like miracle claims and eccentric methods appeared more and more often. Christofleu's work got lumped in with perpetual motion machines and other fringe ideas. Agricultural journals that had once been open to new concepts quietly closed their doors. Manuscripts went unanswered. Letters to editors found no reply. University researchers, always worried about funding, always wary of ridicule, steered clear of public support. And the British Electroculture Committee's findings? Those reports stamped not for publication? They rarely reached the wider scientific world. In the most influential circles, electroculture was boxed in as pseudoscience. The conversation shifted from "what can this method do" to "is it even worth discussing?" By the late 1930s, the story of copper wires and atmospheric energy had been reduced to footnotes and folklore. The question of proof faded, replaced by a silent agreement that some experiments were just too strange for polite company. For nearly a century, that's where the story stayed, buried in old patent files and forgotten journals. Until recently. The modern proof nobody can ignore. In recent years, researchers in China decided to test electroculture on a scale never attempted before. The Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences set up an experiment covering 3,600 hectares. That's an area larger than 6,000 football fields. They suspended high-voltage wires above the crops, harnessing the natural electric field between sky and earth, much like Christofleau had imagined, but on a scale that could feed a city. The setup didn't use chemical fertilizers or pesticides, just electricity from the atmosphere. And the results? They were impossible to ignore. Across the trial fields, yields climbed by nearly 30%. More wheat, more rice, more vegetables, without adding a single drop of synthetic fertilizer. But here's what really shocked people. Pesticide use dropped dramatically, in some cases by 70% to 100%. Farmers reported fewer insects and healthier plants, even in regions where pests had been impossible to control. These weren't lucky coincidences or small backyard experiments. This was institutional science with numbers large enough to silence any claim of fluke results. The data showed that plants, when given access to Earth's natural currents, could thrive on energy that had always been there, free, silent, waiting just above the soil. For the first time in nearly a century, the old claims of harvests multiplied by wire and weather had real measurable backing at a national scale. The question wasn't, does it work, anymore. The question was, why isn't everyone doing this? The difference between safe and dangerous. Before anyone gets too excited, we need to talk about safety. Because not every electroculture method works the same way. The copper spiral, used in passive electroculture, relies entirely on the natural voltage difference between sky and soil. There's no external power source, no batteries, no wires plugged into anything. The copper wire simply acts as a better antenna, quietly collecting the gentle charge that's already present in the air. This is completely different from powered systems that run high-voltage electricity through fields using transformers or generators. Those setups can send thousands of volts across suspended wires. Yes, they've produced measurable results in controlled studies, but they also come with serious hazards: electric shock, fires, damage to equipment. Even a small wiring mistake can turn an experiment dangerous. Passive copper spirals, on the other hand, are as harmless as a weather vane. They pose no electrical danger to people, pets, or electronics. The only energy they use is what Earth and sky provide naturally. This distinction matters. Confusing the two methods could lead to accidents or disappointment if someone expects dramatic results from a homemade coil wired to a car battery. The beauty of passive electroculture is its safety and simplicity. It's something anyone can try with nothing to plug in and nothing to fear. But it's crucial to know where the line is and keep experiments firmly on the safe side. How to try it yourself. So let's say you want to test this in your own garden. What do you actually do? The method is straightforward, but details matter. Start with 14-gauge bare copper wire. That's about as thick as a sturdy paperclip. You'll need enough to wrap into a loose spiral about 5 to 20 centimeters in diameter. Some people use a wooden dowel, 12 to 16 millimeters wide, as a form to keep the coil even. Wind the wire around it to create at least 3 full turns, spaced so air and light can pass through. Once shaped, drive the dowel into the soil so the spiral sits 10 to 15 centimeters deep, with the top end pointing just above the surface. Here's the crucial part. The tip of the spiral must face magnetic north. Use a compass. Don't skip this step. Earth's telluric currents flow north to south, and orientation can mean the difference between results and nothing. Position the coil 10 to 20 centimeters from the base of your plant. Tomatoes, beans, squash, they all respond well. But some gardeners report the most dramatic results with leafy greens. To track changes, record the height, leaf size, and pest activity every 2 weeks. Take photos. Weigh your harvest at the end of the season. One grower in Ohio logged a 40% increase in lettuce yield using just 1 copper spiral per row. Fewer aphids, no powdery mildew. Everything else stayed the same. Same soil, same water. The results may vary. But the method is safe, silent, and costs less than a cup of coffee. For anyone willing to experiment, this could change how you think about what's possible in a garden. What this really means today, global fertilizer use tops 185 million tons per year. Soil health is declining. Costs are soaring. Farmers everywhere are looking for sustainable answers. And yet, a method that worked nearly 100 years ago, documented, patented, proven, remains almost completely unknown. Why? The real question isn't whether electroculture works everywhere or under every condition. The real question is why simple, low-cost experiments threaten trillion-dollar industries. When free energy meets corporate resistance, progress slows. For everyone? But here's the thing. You don't need anyone's permission to try this. You don't need to wait for universities or governments to validate it. You can test it yourself. In your backyard. This season, that's what Christofleau wanted. Not patents locked in vaults or secrets hidden from the public. He wanted every farmer, every gardener to have access to this knowledge. The harvest of the future depends on what we're willing to rediscover. So here's my challenge for you. Try one copper spiral this season. Pick one plant, track it, take photos, and let me know what happens. Drop a comment below and tell me, are you willing to experiment with this? Or does this sound too strange to take seriously? And if you found this story as fascinating as I did, share this video with someone who loves gardening or who's interested in forgotten technology. We're rediscovering something important here, and it's worth spreading. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got more stories like this coming. Practical, empowering, rooted in real science. Thanks for being here. Now get out there and test something the world tried to make you forget. I'll see you in the next one.